didn't want anything that would allow us to get kind of slapped down before we got started. And that's a very different approach, but it's also why Core is different. We care about product market fit. People like myself have been in the industry for 15 plus years. We built real things. We worked at real companies. It's not just kind of a science fair project that we hope accrues value one day. The idea here is to solve a real problem for real people. And that's where it all starts. Like if you can't get that part right, the rest of it is just, luck if it kind of works out in some way.
Okay, we're back. Welcome back, everyone. Got Rich Rines from CoreDAO, one of the core contributors. He's been on the show before. Bitcoin DeFi, it's a big topic. It's a hot topic, and it's definitely a topic that isn't going to be going away probably ever. For those who know about it, essentially Bitcoin, smart contracts, yields, all the good things that we've known in the Ethereum landscape, bringing obviously Bitcoin into the fold. Ever-changing space, evolution happening right in front of our eyes. And Rich is very much at the forefront of it. Welcome, sir. It's great to have you back. How are you doing?
Doing good. Excited to be back. Always enjoy our chats.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like my curiosity at the moment with what you guys have been doing is, there've been kind of like all these goals and aspirations. When we first spoke, it was kind of like, well, let's activate Bitcoin. It was all about let's make it a lot more interesting than what it was, and a lot has obviously happened. And I wanted to just check in. It's kind of like there's been bridging, there's been airdrops, there's been I'm hearing yields. Give me a summary. What's been happening in CoreDAO's world?
Yeah, I remember when we first met, we were talking a lot about kind of what we had today, but this much broader vision of kind of how things were going to unfold over, the next year, 3-year kind of time horizon. And things have changed dramatically since that first conversation. And kind of the idea behind Core, just for those that are, uninitiated, is it's really trying to help scale Bitcoin and also solve this security budget problem that Bitcoin will have between 1 and 2 halvings from now. The miners need additional revenue streams to keep Bitcoin secure and decentralized. Core also rewards the Bitcoin holders with staking, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But over the last 6 months, there's been essentially a vertical graph in the TVL and daily active user numbers on Core. There's now about 300 million in TVL. There's tens of thousands of daily active users. And Core is quickly becoming the most liquid, high activity Bitcoin DeFi ecosystem. And we're trying to unlock the $1.5 trillion of trapped Bitcoin liquidity, because our bet is that, let's call it over the next 1 to 5 years, estimates may vary, a large amount of Bitcoin is going to make its way into Bitcoin staking or make its way into Bitcoin DeFi. And that's going to dramatically change the crypto landscape, because Bitcoin is the hardest money any of us will ever know. It's the perfect collateral. Even if you're just using it to get leverage in the form of stablecoin while maintaining upside of your Bitcoin, it's a massive product that has huge amounts of product market fit. The kind of newer entrance to the side of the core business, if you will, is Bitcoin staking. And this was launched in early April as part of the token 2049. And the idea there was Bitcoin holders can now participate in governance. They can now earn risk-free yield on their Bitcoin by helping to secure the core chain. It's risk-free because those Bitcoin never leave Bitcoin L1. You're being paid for the security you bring into the core network. And there's no slashing, which is critical for some of the institutional adoption that's also occurred since we last spoke. There's now several yield-bearing Bitcoin ETPs that are live in Europe. We hope to take these to the Middle East, Asia, and then eventually, hopefully, some ETFs over the next year or so. So a lot of work to be done there. And there's over 300 million in Bitcoin staked, in addition to the 55% of the Bitcoin hash rate that's currently securing the chain. So the chain has come a long way and is closer on the journey to fulfilling its mission. But Core really has a much longer term time horizon than many crypto projects. This is a 10+ year mission. We have to unlock Bitcoin. That's not going to happen overnight. I tell people on a daily basis, Core is 1% of the way through its journey. And the vast majority of my day is actually spent educating folks, a lot early Bitcoin holders, how they can get involved. And it's important to build products for these Bitcoin holders, no matter where they are on that journey, whether it's Bitcoin staking or fully degenning, in leverage perp trade or something like that on Core. We welcome all of this activity, and it's all meeting people where they're at today. So There's also, I want to say, 100 plus projects that are launched on Core now. Probably there's 100 that'll launch before the end of the year. It is about 65 people that are contributing to the protocol directly, with thousands more around the world that are engaging on a more part-time basis.
Wow, really? That's insane. Yeah, that's a lot. There's obviously, yeah, I mean, we see so much kind of like, projects coming into the mix, well, ecosystems coming into the mix with a whole lot of ambitions, and I think probably 98% of them do have, like truly good intentions around that, but we know it's really difficult to get that attention and to essentially drive home, this dream and this ideal. We've seen it so often, a great idea comes and someone solves a whole lot of stuff and it just doesn't happen, for whatever reason. And it's really cool to see an idea get conceptualized, and to see where you guys are at in this journey. And I'm sure it hasn't been easy. I'm sure you've got stories to tell around, the difficult side to this whole thing. I mean, we can chat about it, but I'm really intrigued at this point in our discussion. You mentioned the security budget, and the reason why I'm intrigued by that is that it's always a question that's been asked for a long time. Is, at what point does Bitcoin mining become unsustainable? And a lot of people think it only happens in, towards the end. I think what's it, 2130 or something like that. But in fact, it's a problem that's going to occur long before that. And for those who don't know, Bitcoin miners rely on the fees that they earn, which is namely the reward in Bitcoin, in order to be incentivized to carry on mining and to be that important component in the security of the Bitcoin network. How does Core, I mean, I know that we've chatted about this before, and for those who are familiar with Core, I do apologize that we're repeating, but I think we need to continue educating. And I'm going to ask the question again. How does the dynamic between existing Bitcoin miners, kind of like exist, and the development and the progress of, Core as the network?
So there was one, not to correct you, but there was one piece of your description of how Bitcoin miners make money today that is not totally accurate. So today they make money off transaction fees, but critically, the majority of it comes from block rewards. And it's the block rewards that each halving get cut in half, right? And that's this really easy to understand, but hard ratchet monetary policy that's very difficult to deal with, because historically the Bitcoin price has always appreciated enough to make up for that, or to offset that loss in just the raw amount of Bitcoins that are produced. And now, as we go into the additional halvings, there's a lot of doubt of whether or not Bitcoin will continue to go up as dramatically as it has in the past. And if we can't subsidize it in new ways, there's only a few options. So option one is the transaction fees are enough to make up for it. And we've seen some periods of congestion on the Bitcoin chain where it has been, very lucrative to be a Bitcoin miner, but those have been few and far between. Hasn't really had any staying power after runes or really kind of early BRC20s. Like, there hasn't been any staying power there. I don't think we should assume that we're going to solve that on a very quick period of time. Over time, the goal is definitely to get there, but it's a very hard nut to crack. Other solutions that people have posed in the past, moving Bitcoin and adding tail emissions, so getting rid of the 21 million meme and having it, kind of continually emit. I think that would destroy a lot of the value prop of Bitcoin if we change the scarcity component. And then the final one would be pulling Ethereum and moving towards, proof of stake from an original proof of work chain. I think one of the pieces of Bitcoin that is so valuable is that it is proof of work. I think that would have a very similar deleterious effect. And also, just logistically, I think with the Bitcoin community, that's very different than the Ethereum community, with such like a strong centralizing force that allowed it to make it through that shift. So with all of that background context, Core rewards, again, a little over 50% of the Bitcoin hash rate today in the form of Core block rewards for helping to secure the Core network. You can think about it like an alternative to merge mining. So it's not quite the same. Merge mining has some pros and some cons. Notably, there are some incentives to misbehave potentially or to censor blocks. Core eliminated those with how it does this delegated proof of work, which is part of its novel Satoshi Plus consensus. But the idea is these miners can now participate in two ways. They can delegate the hash and receive the rewards for doing so. They can also stake Bitcoin in their treasuries. And this is a pretty interesting kind of new component that Core helped bring to the world with this first ever non-custodial staking. Is now as a miner, in addition to just spending down some of that Bitcoin, you can now earn yield on that Bitcoin as well. And we think that will help change some of the dynamics with how the miners continue to evolve and grow. And if that Bitcoin can yield on top of these additional rewards, there is positive influence on this overall profitability issue that the miners are facing. And we're seeing a bunch of interesting kind of explorations, if you will, from many of the public miners in the US. Like Marathon very publicly started mining Caspa recently. So we're going to see, and they also created Slipstream, the private mempool. So many of these miners and mining pools are actually looking for alternative revenue streams because they're even more concerned about the problem than Core is, right? Like that's an existential threat to their business. So we have an active dialogue with many of these folks, and people are hungry for solutions like Core, and we're happy to give the folks what they want.
Yeah, I think.
Let me just add one. Sorry, let me just add one piece.
Yes,
I totally missed it. It's also important to think about this at a holistic level, which is, are these ecosystems symbiotic or parasitic? And what we've seen is, with many of these scaling solutions, they're almost parasitic to Bitcoin, where they're not really adding things back. And what Core cares about is Bitcoin alignment. Now it's kind of become a more popular phrase. We stole it from the Ethereum ecosystem. But the idea here is we should be rewarding and entwining both communities, because ultimately that's how we'll unlock the $1.2 trillion of trapped Bitcoin liquidity, is by merging the Core community and the Bitcoin community. And that's beyond just the Bitcoin miners, right? It's also the Bitcoin holders through staking. And I think that's a great question, is like, as a Bitcoin network participant, if you get involved in their ecosystems, are you giving back to Bitcoin or not? It's a great kind of litmus test. And it's important as we think about scaling solutions beyond even just Core. Is there a symbiotic relationship?
That's really the crux of it, right? I mean, you're not going to attract these miners in and their hash power if you don't actually create a symbiotic relationship. It has to have the exchange, which clearly you guys have got going. I mean, in terms of the allocation, so it is, just explain to me on like a technical level, is it an allocation of hash power through a program or an application? How does that actually work in terms of the Bitcoin network itself and the Core network? Is there a differentiation between the two? How does that dynamic come into play?
So there was a lot of work leading up to the launch of Core to say, how do we make this really simple, easy to understand, minimize the amount of requirements that go into it? Because again, Core is a product-focused blockchain. And what we mean by that is we mean bringing products to people they're comfortable with and allowing them to participate in a manner of which they feel comfortable. That isn't just DeFi versus staking. It also applies to interactions with miners and other folks. So how they do it is they actually add a little bit of data to the OP return field when they produce blocks on the Bitcoin chain. So it's all auditable and verifiable. You can look at it at mempool.space or your favorite block explorer. But the idea here is they're getting rewarded for the hash that they delegate. There's this actor called a relayer in the Core ecosystem that brings the block over, and it relays the block headers to be specific. There's also an actor called a verifier that makes sure no one's acting malfeasant as part of that process. And then the whole thing operates on a 1-week delay to handle things like reorgs or other kind of nasty, negative externalities that you'd have to deal with. But that's delegated proof of work in a nutshell.
Okay, cool. So in terms of this relationship that obviously is critical to the operation of this entire ecosystem, what traction have you guys had with miners? I know that there have been conversations and there were a lot of miners that were coming on board. What does that look like compared to when we last spoke? What do the numbers look like?
So I'm trying to remember the last time we spoke, but we've been creeping up slowly like all year. And again, these are processes that take time. And again, in total transparency, we expect by the end of the year, it will be demonstrably different. Eventually you get to like diminishing marginal returns, right? But there is kind of this ongoing process. And what we've learned again is many folks in the Bitcoin ecosystem, whether they're miners, holders, et cetera, the problem is education. And it comes down to fundamentally getting on the same page about what are the risks, what are the opportunities, whether it's staking on your treasury, whether it's participating in the hash delegation. And with that, people tend to start slow, they dip their toes in, and then they build from there. And that's a motion that we're very comfortable with. Because the idea here is, on some level, there's like an institutional sales process as part of this, but we're trying to build long-term relationships, right? Like this is a intertwining of two very separate communities that we hope will become one. That doesn't happen overnight. That takes years. Yeah. And again, Core's been live for 18 months or so now, so longer than most of the Bitcoin Season 2 projects, but not super old in terms of like the grand scale of crypto. But there's just so much left in the Core story, and we're not in a race to get to, you know, infinity numbers just to launch a token, right? Like we've been live for a long time, and we're at the stage of maturity where it's really about kind of this long march to, you know, to as big and bad of a product protocol as we can build. And we appreciate that'll take time and, you know, deep partnerships.
Okay, so the big one I think is obviously, you know, Bitcoin as a collateral base. You know, there's all this potential, there's all this value, $1.2 trillion. I mean, obviously not all of it is going to be accessible, but you know, even like 1 trillion, I'm sorry, like even 100 billion to start off with is like, you know, a big step in that direction. I know that that's your personal goal. I don't know if that's changed. That's the number you threw and said, like, I think 100 bill is definitely achievable. What has been the strategy? I think from Core's perspective, I mean, it's not just, well, we'll build it and they'll come. I mean, obviously the educational side of it is super important, but how have you guys approached it up until now? And I mean, I'm not asking you that to divulge your secrets. I don't think it necessarily is a secret. It's just a genuine interest around, like, how do you change people's minds? I mean, I think that's what it is. It's like, you know, why would I go and do this? I mean, I know that the one thing that we spoke about when we had Alex on was that, you know, there is no risk in terms of losing your Bitcoin. Just speak us through kind of like I think that the important part to this discussion is kind of the innovation that you guys have unlocked, you know, with the time lock thing, and just explain that to people who are listening, you know, that there is essentially no risk beyond just not being able to access or sell your Bitcoin within that period of time.
So I think taking it from like a first principles approach, if you will, the idea and how Core generally brings products to market is understanding what the users really want. And the audience for Bitcoin stakers is quite broad. There's capital allocators, there's family offices, there's individuals, there's ETFs. Like there's so many different groups that you have to kind of design for. And I've been in Bitcoin since 2013, as have many of the contributors to Core. And I think there's a common thread amongst all of us is we've never done the centralized lending play. And the reason why is we care a ton about decentralization and custody risk. And that was a fundamental, do not pass go, do not collect $200. But by starting with the product, building something for Bitcoin holders, no matter where you are in your like risk tolerance, you wouldn't be able to say that this is violating some core principle that you have. And that was so critical to us because we didn't want multi-sigs. We didn't want anything that would allow us to get kind of slapped down before we got started. And that's a very different approach, but it's also why Core is different. We care about product market fit. People like myself have been in the industry for 15 plus years. We've built real things. We've worked at real companies. It's not just kind of a science fair project that we hope accrues value one day. The idea here is to solve a real problem for real people. And that's where it all starts. Like if you can't get that part right, the rest of it is just, you know, luck if it kind of works out in some way, right? So that was the starting point. From there, it becomes education. And I talk about, I'm like the chief educator of the Core ecosystem today. And it's amazing that we have conversations with folks like you where we can help get this message out there. And the conversation usually goes like this when I'm on a podcast or something else, I'm giving like kind of the normal discussion topic. But when I'm chatting with, you know, an individual or a large holder or something else, it almost always goes the same way. Number one, I'm never giving you my Bitcoin. I never gave it to everyone else. I'm never giving it to you. And I'm like, hold on a second, just so you know, you never have to give it to us. We don't want it. Do not give it to us. You know, like, don't send it to us. It's totally non-custodial. And we go through these list of questions, right? Where does the yield come from? And we tell, it's core block rewards, 81 years. You only have to understand core. Like, but we bring them through all these different pieces. Oh, it's sustainable over 81 years. Like we do that round of due diligence with these folks. And sometimes that takes multiple phone calls. Sometimes it takes others, whatever. And these are the exact same talking points that I give on podcasts because the vast majority of people I never speak with. Like, it's only certain people that we actually have, direct relationships with. But that's the process. And then again, in total transparency, what many of these folks do is they dip their toes in the water. They might be a really large Bitcoin holder, but they're willing to start with 1 Bitcoin or 10 Bitcoin or whatever that is. And over time, we just kind of watch that grow. And that's why, again, we have this long-term time horizon, because we ultimately want everyone to be comfortable with what they're doing. If we wanted to play games that were just all about short-term whatever, we do non-economic games just to kind of bring people in. Ultimately, that doesn't help us achieve our goal, right? Like, we're talking about much larger numbers than the 300 million that we have staked today. So there's just a lot of work to be done there, but we have to make sure we get off on the right foot. And we have a wonderful amount of partners that are constantly helping us with this mission. So the first yield-bearing ETP is an amazing partnership with Valor. We're going to take those throughout the world later this year. So many custodians are either online or coming online. It's a real community effort to help get the Bitcoin community off zero. It used to be allocation being 1%. Now we're trying to tell everybody it should be at least 1% staked. And that's what we think is, kind of the next tagline in the wave of Bitcoin's growth.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like it was always going to be like whoever doesn't take my Bitcoin and affords me the opportunity to actually earn a yield off of that is going to win. And clearly, you guys have got that in the works. But you have to explain how the time lock works, what that tech is all about. And I think that for me is super important, obviously, as part of this education. It's not just a conversation, well, we're not going to take your Bitcoin. Well, then what are you going to do? And it's not a catch for those who are listening. It's actually super cool. And in many ways, it actually is doing you a favor. Tell us, Rich.
So it's using a native Bitcoin opcode that I believe has been on Bitcoin since 2015, I believe. It's just we were the first ones to use it for this purpose. But it's check, time lock, verify. And the idea is you time lock the Bitcoin to yourself. So it never actually leaves your wallet, but you cannot spend that Bitcoin until whatever block you locked it till has gone past. And then you just issue this redeem script to bring it back to make it usable again. So it's a very easy lock, unlock process after that time lock has elapsed. But critically, you're never sending those Bitcoins to anyone else. So there's no scenario when you're staking with Core where Core can somehow access those Bitcoins. And that's really critical. And again, one of the ways that we've been able to have these institutional products is because you have that very strong guarantee by only relying on Bitcoin. There's not a situation where these ETPs, and again, hopefully soon ETFs, wind up with a hole in their balance sheet. And that's really critical because we understand these holes in balance sheet problems, they might sound like they're low probability or whatever, but inevitably they happen. And it's important to understand that you don't have to trust Core. And that's the message that we tell everybody is like, there's many of these points protocols, maybe restaking things that are all coming to market, but there's some dependency. And these dependencies are where risk, even if it sounds minute, exist. And you need to actually factor in a risk premium for those things. And as long as you understand it, those can totally be great options. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
Like, I think the world of Bitcoin yield is just getting started. And Core is really this base layer primitive that restaking all these other protocols will build on top of. And that's a perfect spot for us. If you want risk-free yield, we're just trusting Bitcoin, boom, do it on Core. And then if you want to take on a little bit more risk, use Pell Network or Babylon or something, and then kind of get that additional risk that comes out of it and be rewarded for it, additional yield, I should say, sorry, I misspoke. That's totally interesting as well. And know that there's gonna be 1,000 flowers that bloom in this space. And we're just super, super stoked to be the staking provider.
So I want to just kind of like interrogate, in terms of the dApps that are building on Core at the moment. Are you guys doing the staking yourselves, or do you have dApps that have come in that are offering that service? How is that dynamic being kind of like offered or presented to the consumer at the moment?
So I'm proud to say that Core has launched absolutely zero protocols on the Core network and has also staked zero Bitcoin. So it's important that we've taken a very different approach than most groups, because we think long term you actually have to do the work. You have to get people excited about it. You have to get the product market product market fit. You can fake it, but eventually that comes due, right? And it's important to really do things the right way. When it comes to how people are using this yield today, the primary interface right now is directly Bitcoin staking, which is a protocol level concern. And again, they get paid out from Core's consensus mechanism directly. That is quickly changing. So one of the most exciting areas, I think, of all of Bitcoin space right now is Bitcoin LSTs. In Bitcoin LSTs, there's a number that are building on top of Core's yield. And it's so exciting because it's kind of this missing second primitive, if you will, which is now that you've got staking yield, it should go similar to what happened in Ethereum with STETH, where why hold just Bitcoin if you can have yield-bearing Bitcoin? Like, it simply has more utility. In exchange for doing that, of course, there's bridge risk or other things that you have to factor in. Don't get me wrong, but we think that's actually the killer app on top of staking is these LSTs, because it gives you that missing primitive that can now be stacked into these other protocols, whether it's restaking or even just like, CDPs, you name it. But now your freedom to create is equivalent to what you have in the Ethereum ecosystem, right? Because this baseline yield, like, again, credit to the Ethereum folks for getting it out there, that's when the explosion of DeFi season 2 really took off, right? Like we had the original DeFi summer, everything else, but yield on top of ETH changed everything. And we think that's coming very soon in Core, and will have a similar effect for Bitcoin.
I was actually going to ask you, like,
zillion other dApps, but sorry,
I was going to ask
you
other
dApps that are holding it.
Yeah. I mean, I was going to ask you, like, the playbook's already been written, and in terms of Ethereum, like, do you think that it's going to land up playing out in a very similar way in terms of the evolution, or do you think a whole lot of lessons have been learned? Obviously, they have, and then, like, how does it then transpire as like a difference, between the two, or do you think similar lessons learned? You don't do this, you don't do that. I mean, how does that look like practically, from what happened in ETH? I mean, I know you've touched on it now, but like, does it become something even more significant? Or do you think it's going to be very similar?
So I think it becomes significant in a very different way. So I think the idea of ETH as a Bitcoin testnet, like, it's a meme, but I think in a lot of ways it's true, but not in a pejorative way. We got to see so much and learn so much from the Ethereum ecosystem that we get to learn from 10 years, right? Like, that's a huge advantage and a huge head start. We know that Bitcoin as like a holder base moves a little bit slower. It's taken us longer time to get to DeFi. That's totally fine, but let's not forget all those lessons. There's a lot of pain that also came out of that. There's no reason to start back from square zero again. Let's kind of build on top of it. And what we've seen in the core ecosystem so far, you've got you've got very different things that are emerging. On one hand, you've got all the kind of Ethereum staple like DeFi primitives. You've got Colend, which is the borrow lend, which is kind of native to Core. You have NLX, the native perps protocol. You go down the stack, there's so many amazing teams that are building on Core that are essentially taking Ethereum DeFi, but making them Bitcoin based. And I think that's the starting point of a lot of the, hey, how do I take the mental image that people have, transpose it over to Bitcoin, and give a better collateral asset? And that's like phase 0, if you will. I think many of these will grow to be very, very large protocols and will, be awesome businesses, especially as time goes on and Bitcoin DeFi grows. There's another aspect, though, to address your second question of how is it different? And I think the how is it different is an evolving conversation, don't get me wrong. But what I keep telling folks is you need to think about Bitcoin DeFi different than Ethereum DeFi. Just replicating what's over there, interesting, good businesses, don't get me wrong. Like, I would never say that's bad. But I think people aren't necessarily appreciating the scale of Bitcoin. So the example that I give really frequently is the killer use case for Bitcoin is upside exposure to Bitcoin, leverage in the form of dollars. One primitive way to do that is with CDPs. There's several of those that are launching on Core, and there's a bunch of other ones that will come not far after. Those businesses, if they can scale, which is as much of a BD go-to-market effort as anything, should be AUM fee-generating machines. And they might not even need tokens. And I think that's a very critical differentiator from the Ethereum ecosystem, where the business model of most projects was just token creation. But if you can get decabillions or even single-digit billions potentially in some of these CDP protocols, and you're clipping 30 bips, that's a good business. Like, people don't appreciate that. Like, you're taking a known business model that we have in TradFi and applying it to groups that have a massive amount of capital. And I think that's the next wave that will absolutely shock what can be done. Like we look at the fees of pumped up fund and some of these other things, which are like, astronomical by crypto standards today. Wait till 100 billion of Bitcoin comes into like, it's going to dwarf anything we've seen before. And it's hopefully going to eventually rival TradFi, which is why we're all here, right? Like I remember the when I first got into Bitcoin in 2013, it was an alternative to the traditional financial system. Bitcoin has done an amazing job growing and kind of becoming this alternative to gold. Now it's to complete that cycle and hopefully replace banks and all these intermediaries that none of us want to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, it's really cool that you brought up the topics that you just brought up around token generation, viable businesses, replicating what we already know works in a traditional finance scenario. These are conversations that we've had so many times, and it's like I always make reference to Dan Hughes, the founder of Radix. He's such a cool guy. I don't know if you've met him, but he's definitely someone that you should speak to if you haven't. And he always says it's like it needs to be about businesses. It can't be just about this idea around protocols. It's fine that we refer to them as protocols when they're in development and the rest of it, but there needs to be a goal that centers around being a profitable business. And you just hit the nail on the head with that. And I love that. I think for me, that's probably the single most important aspect of why I'm here. I'm here because I believe that the space is the future. I'm here because I want to be a part of the new thing. I don't want to be, doing what everybody else is doing. That's just who I am. And I think for me to be able to kind of like carry that torch, there needs to be that for me. It's like, and I think a lot of people feel that way, but it's also really easy to get caught up in this whole idea that, okay, well, I'm here, I'm going to make money, and then, I'll make my money and then I'll move off. And it's great to see that you guys don't have that attitude. It's kind of like, well, everyone wants to make money, but it's got to be off the back of an idea that's actually going to transcend what this is actually all about. What is it all about? It's about making things more efficient, making things viable, obviously cheaper, and replacing a current system that's so antiquated it's a joke. I mean, it's a joke, the way that traditional finance operates. And you've got the holistic perspective around the way that you want core to be. And it's really refreshing when you say, furthermore, they don't have to have a token. And I've always said that. I've said, well, 98% of protocols don't need tokens. Find a product market fit, put the product out there, and it'll print, on its own bat. Does Aave need a token? No, they don't. They've got a profitable business the way that it is. Yes, it has its issues and its trappings and its challenges, but it's a great business. It didn't need the token. And I think that's where we need to go, and I think that's what we need to be pushing towards. So kudos to you guys for doing that. And thank you for listening to my rant. I really appreciate it.
I think it's a healthy perspective. I think it's important that like tokens can be used for building a community. Like there's all these pieces that can be very valuable to launching a token. But I think like my mental frame of like, and I've been in crypto for a long time, is that it doesn't necessarily need to start with the token, right? It can start with a really good business. And I think like I get kind of surprised on crypto Twitter or whatever. People are in this cycle, I think is truly different than many cycles. We're actually seeing some product market fit and people are surprised. Like they're like, what? People are actually using something? Like, and that's just this like crazy, as someone who's built businesses for a long time, that like makes my head spin, right? It's just like, I can't believe we're surprised by that as an industry. And hopefully, and I think we are on this path towards changing this, but I think it's no longer just like Rube Goldberg machines of like who can build the most complex, hard to understand thing. And then hopefully, people get involved or whatever. I think now it's much more like how do we build real businesses? And like Aave is a great example. Look at Aave, look at Maker. You're talking hundreds of millions in revenue. Like you're talking, these are scaled businesses. Could they have got there without the token? That I don't know. It's hard with these counterfactuals because I think it did such an amazing job of building it. Like there's so many pieces that were really useful there. But at this point, you're not seeing them issue new tokens. You're not seeing them have to go back to that well because they got to escape velocity. And I think that's amazing. It's showing like this DeFi 1.0 renaissance is really super healthy for crypto. Like people hate it because they're like, oh, it's a dinosaur coin or whatever. But you look at it and you're like, no, these are real businesses. Like these should be charging fees. And I think that's really healthy. And I, for one, just like been so excited about this cycle for all the crap that we have to deal with, like a routine basis in crypto. It's awesome to see real businesses getting built.
Yeah, I think for me, like Core's been also very much a highlight, and it's because there is this let's dare to go where, like no one else has gone before. Yes, there are a lot of really cool protocols or ecosystems around that are doing similar stuff to what you guys are doing, but it almost seems like you guys have captured and put into effect this vision, your vision, what you've just explained to us. And I think that goes a long way. I think when you probably sit down and when you sit down and you speak to like Maker, for example, we were fortunate to interview Rune when we were in a Token 2049 last year. You can see there's, like, if you had to ask me what is the determining factor between those who succeed in the space and those who don't quite get there, because I don't believe a lot of people don't succeed. It's just they just don't get there. I think that the underlying thing is that you've got to be clear on what your intention and what your vision is. And when we spoke to Maker, it was very clear. Like, this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to do all these financial DAOs. They wanted to essentially deploy as much capital as they could in as many verticals as possible. And there was no like gray area around that. And it's the same with you guys. It's like, well, this is the way that we see things. This is the goal, and you're bloody well doing it. Like 6 months later, I'm speaking to you, and it's like, you were super passionate when I first met you, and now you're even more hyper passionate. It's like, why? Because you're getting somewhere. It's kind of like, and you see it a lot with founders, like when they don't quite get there, they get deflated, and it's really difficult because they didn't have that like really clear vision, or they didn't like really like solidify what that vision looked like and then follow through. I don't know if that resonates with you, but that's been my experience, interviewing and speaking to people like yourselves.
So I think we're blessed to have one of the strongest communities in crypto that pushes us every day. It doesn't matter.
Your community psycho, man. They are completely psycho. It's wonderful.
The Coretosians are incredible, and it's this great positive force to drive you forward every day, right? Like, it doesn't matter if things are going well, if things are going bad, you're going to hear about it. And that's a great force. I think on top of it, we're getting pushed by so many amazing teams around us. And that's also a really healthy space. Like we welcome all the competition. It makes Core better. And with that, I think like in a lot of the Bitcoin scaling solution space right now is like a lot of this kind of co-opetition mode, if you will, where it's like your partners in some ways, competitive in other ways. But that's really healthy because it allows everybody to move forward, to give it their best, to give it their, all their shot. And for us, we run our own race. Like Core has a very defined vision. It's been operating in kind of this stepwise process to ensure that we can do what we set out to do. And if we stay true to that, we have this amazing team that we can go execute and build an amazing product and continue to grow our community. We're only in control of the pieces that we can control, and it's an open permissionless network, so there's not a lot of pieces we control. But it is this interesting balance where it does become reflexive to your point, right? Where as things do start to work, people get more excited. That brings in more builders, that brings in more users. Like all those pieces just start to roll, which is again this tremendous blessing that we have as part of the community. I think there's also this other benefit that's really nice is because we launched before Bitcoin Season 2 happened, I think we get a credibility that really only us and Stacks get, which is, hey, we were here before Bitcoin got popular again. Like, I think there's a common theme between them and us, which like, if you look at our team makeup and composition, there's a lot of underlying Bitcoin maxis there, right? That are actually trying to solve problems for Bitcoiners. And that's now become popular, but it wasn't for a long time, right? Really since probably the 2017 cycle after the block size war kind of destroyed everything for a little bit. But I think it's really important to be super motivated by what you're doing. And at least in the traditional startup world, when initial team people they lose that drive, that's when it's time to move on, right? Like if you're not really passionate about it, if this isn't really what you want to do, you're never going to be able to do the best job for ultimately your communities, your users, developers, etc.
Yeah, and it's what's really cool about listening to you speak is like we see the same thing, like within the context or in the community side of what we have with Blockmates. It's like when things get super tough and you're trying to do stuff and it's not really working, like even though they don't realize it, like the community and the discussions that you have with them land up being like such a positive thing. Like I really appreciate that about the community involvement, and it's yeah, you can't actually put a value on that. I think that really does make it so worthwhile if you got a community that supports what it is that you're doing. Yeah, and you can you can do pretty much anything because they'll tell you if it's shit or not. They'll tell you straight away. Like, listen, dude, that's not cool. It's not going to work. Just in terms of just coming back to the restaking side of it, I actually forgot to ask you the question. Like, are there dApps at the moment that are looking at kind of like the restaking side of things? I mean, is that something that's in the works with projects at the moment? What is the sentiment around that within Core?
So restaking is a very interesting nut to crack. And I say a nut to crack because I think it's a long way from a solved problem, if you will. I think EigenLayer built up a lot of hype in the Ethereum ecosystem over the last year, and then wound up with this supply and demand imbalance, right? Where they wound up with like 20 billion of TVL, handful of AVSs. There's not enough demand on the AVS side today. So they're trying to solve the problem of how to make the economics of restaking work. And just because that's in the Ethereum world doesn't mean it won't apply to Bitcoin restaking as well. And that's a problem that many of these teams are tackling. And for Core, we want to be a base layer yield to help these teams smooth out the yield that they have to produce to help make their protocols offer attractive yields and additional risk premia for the risk that you are taking for bridging or something else. And the reason this is an important problem to solve is, think about Ethereum. Well, when you're participating in EigenLayer or symbiotic or something else, the STETH or ETH that you're bringing in has yield, right? So it allows you to have some base layer yield that you can pay these deposits. In Bitcoin, that doesn't exist. So that supply and demand imbalance problem is that much more stark, but that's also a great role for Core as the only Bitcoin staking product in market to help facilitate and have all of these flowers bloom. And there's a project on Core called Pell Network that I think is like 100 billion TVL that's really excited to bring Bitcoin restaking to several different AVSs later this year. And we're super stoked to help power that, because we think Bitcoin security and restaking it throughout this evolving ecosystem will allow us potentially to have another big differentiator from the Ethereum side of the house. In many of these, Ethereum protocols that launch their own tokens, like the kind of classic example is Chainlink that people use. It's like, do you really need the Link token? Well, maybe you did to stake it, like, because we didn't have this notion of restaking. Maybe some of these future oracles will be restaked, right? They won't have their own token; they'll just be more service providers. And I think we'll see that also change. And again, it's this evolving landscape, and we're happy to just help empower so many of these different teams.
Wow. Okay. So who's the protocol that's developing this? What's their name?
So one of them that is already launched is called Pell Network.
Tell Network. T-E-L.
Pell with a P.
Okay. The only reason why I'm asking is because I'm going to ask them to come on.
I'm really happy to make the connection.
Yeah, please do. I'd really love to chat to them. I think it's a brave new world. I think that's where it's going. I totally agree with you that's the next chapter for Bitcoin, for what's happening in the space. It's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves from this point onwards. Before we close it off, I'm really curious to find out, like, validators, nodes, how does that work within the Core ecosystem? How do people get involved in that? Yeah, really keen to understand the dynamic there.
Yeah, so again, Core is an open and permissionless network, so anybody can become a validator. How you get elected is it looks at your delegated hash, delegated stake, and delegated Bitcoin stake. So it looks at all three, runs a function over it, and then elects the top 23 at the moment. There was a community proposal that was passed, I think in June, that's actually expanding the set to 31. So there's going to be kind of a trickle of validators coming on over the next few months. And it's a mix. Some are smaller groups, some are large, like large institutions, Kiln, I'm trying to think, OKX, if you go down the list, it's a lot of names that they're definitely very familiar with. And the idea is it's trying to find people that care about the core network, that offer some value-added service to their ultimate users or end users, right? And that's been an amazing process to kind of watch unfold. And the idea is over time to continue to expand that validator set. And again, one of the nice parts about it is, again, it allows you to bring in more and more communities in addition to securing your network.
Okay. And then do you guys from the foundational perspective, do you guys offer loans, grants around validators, or is that something that is solely up to those who want to invest, can invest in that hardware on their own?
So one of the nice pieces of like running a core node or a core validator is it's quite cheap. So there's no grants that go out for running these, but it is like very cost effective. There is a delegation program for certain providers as part of the network, but those are kind of like ad hoc, kind of case by case type things, and we see a mix.
Okay, great. So Rich, what's on the kind of like on the horizon, on the agenda for the next sort of 3 to 6 months?
So we'll be at a bunch of events. Definitely come stop by the core booth. Really excited to chat with users, builders, you name it. Come by, say hello, stay hi. Ignition Season 2 is going to start in September. We're very fired up about that. Ignition Season 1 was a big success. And the idea is a dual-sided incentive program for both users and builders, where TVL, daily active users, wallet balances, all are rewarded. And that's another big one for us as we want to continue to reward people who are ultimately bringing value to the chain and participating. And that's a big focus for us because, again, we want a healthy and vibrant ecosystem. There's also a number of product launches that will come out, like the LST, dual staking, which we're super excited about as the capital base of Bitcoin and the capital base of Core are going to merge even further, trying to further tighten the bond between the two communities. And then from there, there'll be our HTLC atomic swaps. We trust us to get over from Bitcoin into the core network. And then on top of that, there's additional ETPs and a whole bunch of stuff coming. Honestly, too much to name, but it's going to be an action-packed end of the year and also a big 2025.
Yeah, I think I might become a core maxi at some point in time. Just too much. Yeah, there's so much going on. It's really cool to hear. And yeah, I really wish you guys all the best. Look forward to getting you back on in a few months' time, and also look forward to meeting you. Definitely going to see you at Token 2049, and I don't know if you're going to come to DevCon as well, but yeah, we'll be there as well. And yeah, you've given us a lot to think about. For anyone who's listening and watching, go check out CoreDAO. Their website is probably one of the most comprehensive, concise, and in-depth websites in the space, like from docs to anything and everything. You guys have done a great job on that. Yeah, go check it out. Yeah, the community is completely crazy in the best possible way. We love putting content out on Core because everyone just raves about it. It's been the best feedback we've had in years, literally, since the last bull market. Because a lot of people haven't really experienced the bull market this time around because they've been focusing on the wrong things. But clearly there's a bull market happening on Core. Anyways, enough of that. Yeah, Rich, thanks for your time. It's been, as usual, a pleasure, and it's really cool to hear what you guys are doing. And yeah, keep it going, sir. It's really inspirational, and yeah, we love seeing what you guys are doing.
Thanks again for having us. Looking forward to chatting again soon.
Cool. Take it easy.
All right. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on for next time. See ya.